Own Way, the podcast with me, your host, Kori McClurg. All right. Welcome to Get Out of Your Own Way podcast. Today I am joined by Brian Zehnle. Thanks for being here,
Hey,
Brian. Appreciate
thanks,
it.
Corey. Hello.
So, a little background. We know each other. We know each other through Annie Grace, who wrote a bestseller called This Naked Mind. And so we've kind of just been working on a bunch of stuff together. But today I really wanted to talk about, I know you are kind of dabbling in and getting things started with what we're calling the Neo Prohibtionist Movement.
Yes,
I know that's not necessarily a word that you came up with. I believe the alcohol industry actually came up with that word, but
exactly.
it's kind of a reclaim. But I'd love for you to just talk about what that is and what your thoughts are around that whole concept.
Yeah. Thank you. I think reclaim is a perfect word for that. Because what we've seen kind of in the writing, especially as like the World Health Organization came out with that information saying, hey, no amount of alcohol is healthy, is that the industry and some of the advocacy groups that are funded by the industry started using this term neo-prohibitionists as alcohol, you know, like that's what we want to do. We want to take away alcohol from people. So kind of reclaiming that word to say, this is kind of the new prohibition is more about education, which is what I think kind of, we've seen it in Canada. We've seen it with the World Health Organization is like, if we were presented with the truth about alcohol, we might make a different decision. And that's all it is. It's like, we're not trying to say you can't have it. It's just, let's make a fully informed choice. I don't know how that looks necessarily, but I mean, that's kind of, it's really the path of freedom, right? Is like right now, if you think about it, we're not making that because from the time we're young, we're just kind of, we get the marketing, we get the societal expectations of this is just how it works. So this is just a way to say, hey, some of those things might not be true that you believe.
Yeah,
Tough
right.
message though.
Like it seems like a common perception is that it's kind of harmless. It's just sort of a
Exactly.
kind of a yuck. Like, oh, we went out and got drunk and yeah, we kind of had a hangover, but I think it seems like the common perception is that's kind of it. Like, oh, well, I just had a
Right.
hangover and that's all that there is. But, what you were talking about the World Health Organization and even in Canada, like what are they specifically saying?
I mean, they started to dig into all of the societal things, but it really just more research that's coming out from all of them saying, hey, you know what? The things that we have packaged before that said, one drink is fine or two drinks a week or whatever it is, that may, based on the information we have now, not be accurate, right? That no amount is actually good. They're not necessarily going out and saying like this level is harmful, but to your point, where it's always been before is the people that we're getting the focus are the problem drinkers, right? So whatever that means for someone, but the focus was always kind of there. And what they're saying now is like, hey, there's more to this. Even a little bit isn't good. So just take that into consideration. And they were publishing a lot more of and you're starting to see this in the cancer type related stories are starting to come out.
Yeah.
You know, I
There's a lot of data around that now that
yeah,
can't. There's a causal link.
I think it's just such a, you even see it with these organizations though, and this is where that neo-prohibitionists came, is they're saying, hey, these neo-prohibitionists are taking over these health committees and making these recommendations where What they're really doing is saying, hey, look, we've got more information. Canada actually says that. It's like we uncovered some additional, studies and whatnot as we learn more. So this is our findings. They're not trying to do anything.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because it is really hard to do something about it. There's a lot of pushback, right?
Yeah.
So this
No
this sort
kidding.
of, hey, we're just trying to educate seems a little bit, you know, better, I
Yeah.
guess.
Right, right,
Not
right.
better, but just a different method.
Right. I mean, it does seem strange that like in California, they have I forgot what proposition number it is that required the labeling of any consumer product that even has the potential of causing cancer, but somehow alcohol got to circumvent that,
Yeah,
you know even though alcohol is, it's a class 1 carcinogen according to the World Health Organization. It seems
exactly.
bizarre to me.
And it's interesting that that label battle has been going on for a long time. Like there was a, well, I can't remember this. I wish I should have this information, but back in 2003, um, there was a push to say, hey, we should do this because it doesn't live under the FDA. It lives under like Department of Tobacco and whatever that is. But
Yeah.
um, it kind of got re-kicked up in a lawsuit back in 2020 to say, hey, remember that stuff we talked about in 2003? You guys haven't done anything. So it kind of kicked back up. It actually ties into a lot of this, but that's a tough one too. Is like, will that do something? You know,
Yeah.
um,
Hmm.
will the will the labeling do it? I don't know that I'm pushing necessarily for like more regulations and stuff, but
Just
it certainly is.
cultural.
It certainly is. There are groups that are really pushing towards like labeling. You're seeing it in other countries as well, much more than in the United States.
Hmm.
To do tests to say, hey, does this have an impact?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right. So you're kind of advocating just more like cultural awareness and education to say your perceptions about alcohol may not be accurate.
yeah, yeah. I think so at this time. I mean, there's a lot of people out there doing the policy side of things,
Hmm.
and it is interesting that a lot of those policy groups, though, are funded by some large alcohol corporations. So a lot of the focus does tend to, even on the labeling, right? They're like, we'll do labels, but if you look at it, it's all around pregnancy and driving drunk,
Right. Right.
not around, hey, this might cause cancer. It actually, some of them now say, you know, what is it? Like it's not healthy or so.
Yeah.
I don't know the wording
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
using.
Yeah.
I should have that, but a
And
lot of it is like focused on not everyone, kind of on this
yeah.
like, hey, here's the small section that it affects.
Right.
And we're
Yeah.
kind of saying, hey, it affects everyone. So
Yeah.
if you take a step back and look at it, maybe you'll make a different decision.
Yeah. Yeah. The always famous drink responsibly. you know.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That thing just cracks me up. Drink responsibly. Like
yeah, for
what
sure.
other arguably poison, would you tell somebody drink
Yeah.
responsibly?
Smoke responsibly.
Yeah.
I never
Right.
heard that one, right?
Never.
And it
Yeah.
is interesting. Like that's where I think so much of this pushback is coming from because when WHO said, hey, no amount's healthy, that was way different from the, hey, you can have like whatever 8 beers a week or whatever, which
Yeah.
so that's I think what's bringing around some of this. I don't know,
Yeah.
fear campaigns almost.
Yeah. Yeah. That, hey, they're coming for your beer. The
Yeah,
fear campaign. Yeah. Yeah. And what's interesting though, kind of back to your point about labeling and recommendations versus, that policy side versus kind of, hearts and minds and general education is even whatever the recommendation before was, I don't did anybody one even know what the recommendation was or adhere to that? I mean, I know I certainly did not adhere to that or even know what the recommendation was, you know.
Yeah, I just think what it did though is it implied that it, maybe not intentionally, but it implied that some was okay,
Yeah.
right? Like even the studies about the red wine and the blue zones and all of that, where they pulled something out of it that wasn't true
Yeah. Yeah.
necessarily, right? Like
Yeah.
so there was an implied sense of this isn't harmful,
Yeah.
or this is even healthy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And now what they're saying is, hey, no amount's healthy, right?
Yeah.
Let alone,
Yeah. Let's not mince words here. All the data points to that there's nothing healthy about this, and that there is a actual causal link between alcohol and certain types of cancer. And that's
right,
just it. Yeah.
among other things. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's really hard to sell on that overarching thing of all the effects that it has on our society, right? Like these, this massive, expenditures. You see that on the
Yeah.
food side and all of it, right? It's a
Right.
hard sell. So trying to bring it down to individual, like you said, heart and mind type thing, seems to
Yeah.
be a more effective approach. It's almost like a counter marketing campaign,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Right.
know,
Yeah.
and that's really, you and I've talked about this, about like the correlation between the tobacco side, where,
Mm-hmm.
what was it, 1964, where the Surgeon General said, hey, but it
Yeah.
took another 20 years to see any movement.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
it wasn't like, so it wasn't a fast movement to where like, we're taking away, cigarettes are still available, by the
Yeah.
way,
Right.
right? No one took them away. It was just like, they almost became uncool.
Exactly.
And I
Exactly.
think about it, like I smoked, I'm 52, so that was my age.
Right.
And what I saw that was interesting is you used to be able to smoke anywhere.
Yep.
And then they created these little sections of like restaurants and stuff for non-smokers, where you're like, you can sit over there, non-smokers, and be free from smoke, right?
Yeah.
Then
No.
they put up like glass walls and said, no, actually, if you smoke, you go in that little room,
Yeah.
you know? And
Right.
then finally they're like, you know what? Screw it. Just go outside. And now it's like, don't go anywhere near our building. So it's
Yeah.
taken,
Yeah.
since 1964. So I
Yeah.
can't do that math. 60
Yeah.
years
Yeah.
since the original guidance to kind of get
Right.
to this societal change,
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah.
which
And
is really, that's fascinating.
as we're talking about this, it's kind of interesting because, to continue the parallel, like even 20 years before the Surgeon General came out with his warning on smoking, there's internal research amongst the smoking industry. They have memos literally from like the
Yeah.
early 50s where they're acknowledging that they know that smoking
Yeah.
causes lung cancer and emphysema, and they even talk about how, like, well, if this gets out, this will be catastrophic, you know. And
Mm-hmm.
it kind of feels like we're a little bit in that era, now of
For sure.
they know, and now the government knows, or at least some organizations, our government, it's not the US government not necessarily acknowledging it, but the World Health Organization and other countries governments are acknowledging it. And yeah, like, it's a fascinating thing of like that progression, right, in the societal
Yeah.
mind. Yeah, it's
And I
very.
mean, I don't know the numbers on like what that would look like to go uncover all of that, right? Like how much bigger alcohol industry is than tobacco industry.
Oh yeah.
But you're up against a huge,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, it's.
yeah, that's going to be interesting. Because we
No, you're
have
right.
heard, like, they do know, right? They know what they're doing with marketing. They're
Yeah.
really good at it.
Yeah, and they know that a huge portion of their revenue comes from people who are legitimately addicted, like
Yeah.
physically, not just psychologically, physically addicted. And they know.
Mm-hmm.
It's and it's unfortunate, like, of course, it's the whole profit motive, right? Why this continues. And um but it's kind of unfortunate that we just, like you were saying earlier, it's almost like we don't get a choice, because the industry is so huge and because it's just so pervasive in the culture. You literally grow up thinking that this is what you do. This is what grown-ups
Mm-hmm.
do, right? I mean, so it is kind of
For
crazy.
sure.
I think what you're doing is laudable
Like
for
if you
sure.
didn't drink as a young person, and I used to think this, like I have said to friends, I don't trust anyone who doesn't drink,
Yep.
right? Many times in my life,
Me
right?
too. Me too.
And I mean that's such a strange thing because and still like if I say to someone, that's saying, "Here, have a drink." And I'm like, "Oh, no thanks, I don't drink." They almost go silent because they assume that
Yeah.
I have some huge problem in my life and
Yeah.
they don't want to, which is couldn't be further
Yeah.
from the truth, right? It's like, no, I
Yeah.
just kind of made a decision. But some of the arguments too there to that point come up on, and it comes from very very brilliant people saying, "Hey, you're going to mess with like social norms and
Yeah.
connection and jobs and I mean all of that's true.
Yeah.
It's just like, are we doing something at the expense? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
compared to smoking too, right? Like I used to
Yeah. Right.
let around, sit around and smoke at my buddies. We just changed, and now we don't do that.
Yeah. Exactly. Right.
There's other
Right.
options, but yeah,
Right.
it would mess with everything.
Yeah. Change
If
that. I mean, any kind of change, right? It's inevitable
yeah,
that things will be different for sure. But you started to touch on it. Like, what was your kind of journey? How did you come to this idea that maybe alcohol wasn't all it was cracked up to be?
yeah, man, it's a tough. I thought of this a long time. There was a. I mean, what happened? It was November of 2018 where I just said, you know what, I'm gonna try to take a break for 1 month, and I had, part of it was I had never taken a break. So, you know, through all the things that, whether it be like some Whole30 challenge or whatnot, I never made it more than 2 weeks, say.
Mm-hmm.
And there was always something like I would also like try to moderate, which makes me believe that somehow subconsciously I was like, man, I think I'm drinking too much.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I would be like, I'm only going to drink red wine, or I'm going to drink on the weekends. I know one that was like, I'm only going to drink tequila, which I'm like, what is
Yeah.
this? But I
Yeah.
mean, there wasn't really, I don't know that there was anything necessarily that led to it. It was just, I had finally got to a point where I was like, this is not aligned anymore. And I was like 46, right? Kind of that midlife, really looking at everything of like, is this really kind of on the path I want to go anymore? And so I stopped for that month, felt pretty good, and decided to go all of 2019. Um, and I did for the most part. I made it. I think it was like through August of 2019. My dog passed away,
Aw.
and my old like 15-year-old beautiful lab, and we decided to go pour one out for her. Have a few drinks because, of course, that's what your lab would have wanted.
Yeah.
But then, so I started, and we all think we can do this, and people can, but like I could just start moderating again. I'll have
Yep.
a drink every now and then, and I was like, what am I doing? I felt so good. Why don't I just stop? And then, so yeah, in 2020, I haven't drank since 2020. Um, and I mean, it's another interesting piece though, is that I could drink, I just don't want to, right?
Yeah.
Like I feel
Right.
total freedom over it. I don't think about it anymore.
Right.
It's not something that hangs over my head. If I wanted to try someone's old fashioned, I could.
Yeah.
I
Right.
just don't want to because I know I'm like I don't like that stuff
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
anymore. So
I mean, I don't, I mean, I think your story is just, it's like millions of other people, right? Like
mm-hmm.
we've all been in that situation where you're like, something's telling you like, I think I'm drinking a little too much, and you try all these different strategies of, like you said, I've done all of that. Like, oh yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'm only going to drink wine because that's supposedly better for you. Or,
Yeah.
I'm only going to have beer because it makes you full and I won't drink as much. Or, I'm only going to drink on the weekend, and, and there's always some reason or excuse how it doesn't stay that way, right?
Yeah.
And of course, we know that the reason it doesn't stay that way is because the substance, it has an addictive quality to it. So
Right.
it's,
Yeah.
it's easy to like backslide right into that. So
Mm-hmm.
that's, yeah,
And it
it's,
does have that immediate calming, right? Like that's what
mm-hmm.
people, you know, we think that like, because it does just shut it off for a little bit, like
It
20
does.
minutes.
Yep.
And if you have more, then it keeps shutting it off. But, what I started to see is like, I wasn't solving any of my problem, like, like
Yep.
whatever it was, loneliness, depression, anxiety, it was pausing it for
Right.
like a night, but then it'd come back tenfold the next day with
Mm-hmm.
shame and guilt. And I'm like, God, this just seems,
Yeah.
ugh. But yeah, I mean, it started just a whole journey, which has been wonderful for me. That was kind of, you know, yeah, that was definitely standing in my way of, well,
Right.
everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
How, have you found that? I mean, how have you found that removing alcohol helped you get out of your own way?
I think, it was interesting because that 2020 was pretty difficult. Well, too, it was COVID,
Yeah.
right? So I mean, I was bored stiff, and really forced me to do some deep internal work of like sitting with feelings and not numbing them. And that was, especially doing it on my own, was rough. But that's where I kind of uncovered a lot of things to be like, man, I was not even on a path that I wanted to be on. Like I was just on someone else's path of
Mm-hmm.
like, this is how your life should go. And now I feel so much more of like, I'm creating this life that I want. And I'm much more authentically Brian, of like,
Mm-hmm.
this is who I am. This is how I live. Um, but it took some,
Yeah.
that was some soul searching cause you're not numbing,
Right.
you know, you're not, you're not squashing anything down. You're like, you're having to
Yeah.
sit with your shit. Uh,
Exactly. Exactly.
and,
Yeah.
uh, and that's not
Yeah.
easy work.
No. Yeah. I mean, from my own experience, I think it's not easy work, but also I feel like the fear of it was so much worse than the actual work.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Good point.
I was so afraid of dealing with things that numbing seemed like the natural thing to do, and I had built it up, not even necessarily consciously in my mind about what that was going to be like. But then when I actually started doing the work, then it was like, okay, yeah, there's some sucky parts to this, but
Yeah.
overall, I feel like my trajectory is like upward.
Oh, for sure. And I mean,
Yeah.
now, like, that's a great point. I just had never done any of that work. Now I'm like, that's all I want to do is
Yeah,
work.
right.
Like,
Yeah.
I'm like, can I find something that pokes a hole in it? And I'm like, what was that?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Like at the
Yeah.
time, it was like, man, I'm lonely and I don't know what to do. And now it's like, wonder what that's about. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
interesting. It just gets easier and easier
I
and more
think so.
fascinating. And like
Right.
when curiosity comes into play, it's like, yeah, it's so amazing.
Well, because I think part of it was, I think the key element is that you set down the shame that you felt about it. Like whatever's coming up, there's no point in having any shame or guilt or whatever about
Mm,
it. Just like look at it instead of compounding whatever emotion you're feeling by now also feeling like shameful about it.
yeah.
So
Oh,
it,
yeah.
you can like let things happen and you're just like, Oh yeah, that is interesting. Not like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm feeling this. I'm such a terrible person. I don't know what to do with this. This must mean that, my whole world is coming to an end. you know.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Like that was compounding it. And this was like, oh, I actually need to learn how to deal with this. Yeah. Um, or
Yeah.
what it's about. Yeah. 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 Thinking back on it. Yeah. It was hard. It was, but man, now I crave it. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's almost it's a, I feel like, emotional growth and intellectual growth for that matter, just, it's, I don't know, addictive's not a good word,
Yeah.
but
That's a word I had in my
it's
head too.
almost, but you kind of want to keep digging because it feels like, oh, there's more to learn here. It just feels like you're never going to necessarily solve it. Um, that was one thing I always thought, in my, I'll say, unhealthier days, was I always thought I just needed to be fixed. Like if somebody could just give me the pill or the hack or whatever to fix myself, then I'd be coasting, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
I think what we figure out is where there's not really the fix, right? There's just the like continuing on this kind of discovery and like letting things be what they are instead of having some weird
Yeah.
expectations. I
Yeah. That's
don't.
perfectly said.
Yeah. Yeah.
And frustrating at the same time to be like, wait, there's no answer. It's
Yeah.
like, no, this is just forever and ever and ever. You just,
Yeah. Yeah. But
but
the beautiful part
it's
is
wonderful. Yeah,
you're
it's
not
great.
all hung up about it like you
Hmm.
were before. You used to be, you'd have such hangups about it. Now you're just like, yeah, this is great. This is great that we're still figuring it out. Like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not
You,
a
and like, what's on the other side sometimes. Like, you're like, yeah, if I sit and play with this, I'm going to become better and
yeah.
at whatever it
Yep.
is. Yeah.
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 Exactly. So
Interesting.
what do
I
you
like it.
find like as you know, you still have friends that, you see them not just drinking, but like still kind of mired maybe in that kind of self
Mm.
destruction, even if it doesn't involve alcohol. Like, how do you see them and how do you find that they kind of still get in their own way and
Yeah. I mean, I see the patterns I had in everyone now, which, and I don't do anything about it. Right. Like,
yeah.
I used to be I used to think like I had to like preach, and
Yeah.
now I just kind of it's more just observing, like, huh, I see all the things that you're doing to distract. I wonder what that's about. Um, because I do them still. I have my things that distract me
Yeah.
still,
Hmm.
for sure. Um, I do see, it is interesting because I have not pressed people. I've been very open about the story of, hey, I stopped drinking, I got very healthy, I feel great, blah blah blah. And I think more than anything, people have seen it and done some stuff themselves. Of what, like,
Hmm.
I have, a lot of them have looked at their own drinking, um, and anything, their own kind of habits, and kind of, I've had some that have adopted, several things, or even talked to me about it. Um, but it's just such a common thing to see. There's so many of us that there's so many distractions out there. It's just,
Yeah.
um, and it, and you have to think that we're using them because we don't want to do that uncomfortable work that you were talking about,
Yeah.
right? It's like,
Yeah.
if I don't get on my phone right now, what am I going to have to do instead? Sit,
Yeah. Right.
you know, be bored.
Hmm.
I mean, I was so bored, Kori. I was so bored during COVID.
Oh my
Oh my
God.
God.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then
I
so
can,
I exercise twice a day. So whatever. But
well, that's,
um,
there's worse things you could be doing
yeah,
for
I
sure.
know. Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I see it. And I do have, several friends that have gone through, and I've played in the kind of the recovery space. You see it there too, of just like, you know, are you getting to the kind of the root problems? Or are you just kind of
Right.
saying, hey, this is bad. You know, you're a bad person. You have a problem. Like, I don't see a lot of people come out of that
Yeah.
a lot positively. I have some, but this freedom seems different, if that makes sense.
In
I see a lot of people
21.
stuck in the shame and the, you know,
Right.
and that kind of cycle that I was in.
Yeah.
And I'd love to have them be freer
Yeah.
in
Even
my
as you're
mind.
saying in the recovery community, it seems like, and I've been in those rooms, and it seems like it's very much an identification with I'm broken, there's something wrong with me, and so to salvage anything I can out of this life, I just have to white knuckle my way through every
Mm-hmm.
day and not drink. But that, I'm broken, I'm shameful, and it's it's kind of like, I don't know, it almost, sometimes I get the sense like people think that they deserve that, right? Like there's something else going on, and so it feels comfortable to say there's just something fundamentally wrong with me, and to get around that, then I just have to quit drinking.
Yeah.
And there's not really, like you were saying, there's not a freedom in that, because you're saying I
Yeah.
have to not drink, instead of I'm just deciding not to do it because I don't feel good when I do it. It's inconsistent with my values, et cetera, et cetera. It's like a light a lightness versus a darkness kind of. I mean, the
For sure.
behavior might be the same, but it's definitely a different feeling around it.
That's one of those areas, like on this Neo Prohibition, a piece of it is to be like, hey, look, it's actually an empowering choice. It's not a broken choice. It's really like the healthy, it is a very empowering choice. And I think, what you're seeing too, don't you think, we've seen behavior models change. Like I see this from like a medical field too, and maybe even exercise nutrition, where they'd come in, and it'd be like, you have high cholesterol or diabetes or high blood pressure, exercise more and eat better, right? No one would do that.
Yep.
So from like the health coaching and the nutrition coaching and stuff, what they've seen work, what's in all those programs now is this more positive psychology point of view of like, what do you want,
Mm-hmm.
and what aligns with it. Let's go that direction in little steps, instead of saying you're broken, you
Yeah.
need to eat this way or
Mm-hmm.
exercise this way. Let's find your life that you want
Right.
and start there. It's a much more positive approach that I do see sneaking into the alcohol recovery spaces in different programs. But I see those two kind of diagnosis treatment is the old method, whereas
Yeah.
where and you're seeing it on the health side and the recovery side, both kind of moving in more of a, I don't know what you'd call it, positive psychology type, motivational, uplifting people
Yeah.
versus that,
Right. Right. Instead of pathologizing them. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Definitely. Um, what, as you went through kind of, especially now, I mean, you've not been drinking for several years. So
Mm-hmm.
are you finding like in this time, especially once you set, I mean, you tell me, but I've found that when you set alcohol aside, you have a lot of clarity around things. And do you see these other ways that you have gotten in your own way, or
Mm.
like you were talking a little bit about distraction, like what were the other things that you sort of, the light bulb went on and you were like, oh yeah, this is happening too, but I was kind of masking that with alcohol and whatever else.
Oh man, I had packed them all together, like, because I was, I'd go to a bar and I never drank at home, so I would always go to a bar because like, and that's where that social connection piece
Yep.
is kind of big.
Yeah.
Like I knew
Right.
everyone. It was
Right.
cheers for me.
Yep.
But I would sit there and play on my phone, you know, and eat like shit and exercise never, and then sleep bad. And it was just a
Yeah.
cycle. So
Yeah.
When it was 2020 when I really like, and one of the reasons I was bored is like I got off social media. I started tracking my sleep. I started like it was kind of an all in,
Oh, yeah.
exercise, nutrition stuff. So I saw this is why I was bored because I took away all distractions. I'd turn my phone off at 8. I still do that. I wouldn't pick it up in the morning. Um, so now, like you said, the clarity is there. I still want distractions.
Yeah.
like, um, I think it's more, gosh, I'm trying to see how to word this. I still want I want things to be perfect, I think is my biggest one is like, this, my biggest one is kind of not taking action and trying to distract myself with anything versus just doing it.
Mm-hmm.
It's, which is opposite of what I did with all the other stuff. But like now that I do, if I find clarity, there's some fear there that I don't want to go into it. Like I'm not wording this well, but
But
you
like,
know what I'm talking
yeah,
like
a
this like
fear of taking action is impeding you
yeah, almost on
moving
like
forward.
this non-traditional like authentic me being that person and having that scene is almost uncomfortable, right? Of like
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about something that's ingrained in our lives, right?
Yep.
I'm putting myself out there as like this is me, guys.
Yeah.
This isn't the normal path. People, when I talk about this with friends, are like, "That's crazy. What are you doing?"
Yeah.
Um, and
Yeah.
that only adds to my mind that's saying the
Yeah.
same story, of like, "Hey, why don't you just instead, whatever, play on your phone, go for a run, whatever.
Yeah.
Don't
Yeah.
work on this."
Right. Right.
um, so yeah, I mean, that's my biggest one. I think
How so
is
you kind of said something interesting there about like that the authentic you or being more in your authenticity is kind of on the other side of action. I'll say that generically. But how, I mean, do you feel discomfort in not being able to be that authentic Brian?
hmm, yeah, yeah. I think that's both of them. Like that's interesting because I want to be like, and there's something in there like that I'm like, man, I think this might be what it is. There's some ego maybe involved in here of like I want to help other people find the same freedom I have, right? Like I think
Mm-hmm.
this is ridiculous
Yeah.
that at 52 I feel as good as I do. I'm healthy as I am and happy as I ever have been. But there's a piece of me that's like, but why are you doing that? Is that just ego driven that you think that you need to like preach to other people to be like, hey, look at me, I'm healthy and happy, you should do this too? And that's not it, I don't
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
I think that's that battle of like, there's this, if I do things for others, I think that just comes back on me and it does make me feel better. And
Yeah.
that's fine. But sometimes I think of that authentic self just wants to help everyone. Uh, and I do struggle with that a bit of like, why am I doing that? What's driving that part? Because would authentic me just be like, cool guys,
Yeah.
you do
I
you? I
mean,
don't know. It's an interesting question. I never thought of that.
is is um that fear of am I doing this for the wrong reasons kind of thing? Like, I mean, that's obviously impeding, right? Your desire to help people.
Yes.
So it's almost a you know, even if you were doing it for the wrong reasons, which I don't think that you are, like, even if you were, you'd still be like a net positive, right? For,
Yeah.
you know, for,
Yeah.
for your time on this planet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, kind of what we were talking about too, where that not taking action, the only way to even find that out is to do something
Yeah.
versus right now, I just sit in this like state of paralysis and I'm like, well, this is just comfortable, right? If I don't do anything, I don't mess with either of these. I just sit in the status quo, which is
Yeah.
quite comfortable for me. So
Yeah. I
yeah,
mean, I think
it's
that's pretty universal though, right? I mean,
yeah.
like, people in general, yeah, I watch Rich Roll quite
Mm-hmm.
a bit, and his big thing is like, people don't change until they are in so much pain and discomfort that they are forced to do something, right? And I don't know, to some extent I suppose I get that and I agree with it, but it's almost like the you have to hit rock bottom kind of theory, and I'm not sure that I agree that there has to be a rock bottom, right? Like, I just think I just think it's about the exploration, and it's not necessarily, maybe the visualization of a vertical scale or something is what's troubling to me. Like, I don't think that you have to be all the way at the bottom. I don't think you have to be in so much pain or health crisis or whatever to finally, realize that. I mean, it's kind of like how you decided to, stop drinking. It wasn't that, you were sleeping on the streets. It was, hey, I just figured out that this wasn't helping me and I wanted
Yeah.
to do something different. So it's,
Yeah. I think that's, I, I, I agree. And that is common that we think that we have to hit a rock bottom. And I think a lot of that comes from that. Where's that? The sayings like the motivation comes last, right? Like I didn't know, like until I stopped, I didn't see results. And until I saw those results, that motivation wasn't there, right? So
yeah,
I had to do the action first of whatever it was. And this came into whether it was drinking, exercise, nutrition, sleeping, all of those things. I had to start doing some work, and then I started to notice some things, which gave me the motivation. So it's so backwards of what we think,
yeah,
that we have to like. So you don't. I don't know what it is. Like you have to just want something different for yourself and be willing to just start.
yeah,
But that's really hard. I mean,
yeah, yeah, it
especially with
is
so
hard.
much information out there to know like where do I start?
Yeah,
What do I do?
yeah,
Um,
I think it is hard, and it's almost just though having that willingness, like, even 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 if just to not even do something drastic, just say, yeah, I'm willing to think about this a little bit differently, kind of back
mm-hmm.
to the whole Neo Prohibitionist idea that I'm willing to just entertain the idea that maybe this is not all that it's cracked up to be, and that maybe this isn't helping me. And just entertaining that notion, right? Just for a bit, doing
100.
that
Yeah.
thought experience. Be willing to, watch some of your content, and just hear what Brian has to say for even a few minutes. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
That's so good, Kori. And it stops me too. That's where we start thinking about this change that we're going to make, and we think about it as being so big, right? So like, take exercise. Like we're like, well, I'm going to start exercising. That means I have to run a marathon. They're like, no,
yeah.
man. Uh,
Yeah.
why don't you just go
Yeah.
for a walk every day and
Yeah.
see where it
Uh-huh.
goes from there?
Yeah.
And I've done this in my business, like all of it. And
Yeah.
that's probably why like Atomic Habits and all that stuff are so popular. It's because it's like we're just saying start, man. Like,
Yeah.
and that's so important. If we can just get
Yeah.
started,
Just do a
it's
little, just
oh
just think
So
about it a little
important.
bit. You don't even have to do anything.
I
Just think
know,
about it a little bit.
exactly. And it works. It's effective. It's
Yeah.
just so hard to get our heads around it, to be like, oh, I don't just have to go dive in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
that's a really
I,
good point.
one thing I think that I certainly struggle with, and I see other people struggling with this, is it's almost this, and especially around drinking, and you've experienced this, where you
Mm,
you make it mean something, right? Like either you in your head, or you're afraid that somebody else is going to make it mean something, and you're like, it doesn't mean anything. Like I didn't sleep on the streets. I wasn't like the out, the full out destitute, alcoholic, right? I just That's not what happened. It doesn't mean that. And it doesn't, if I decide that I'm going to think about it differently, it doesn't mean that I'm never going to
mm,
drink again, or it doesn't mean that I think everybody else is bad if they want to keep drinking, or we always like put something else on it, right? Like, what
yeah,
is that going to mean if I let myself think that way? you know it's
yeah, that's so good. I mean,
it's
that
a
even
weird.
that made me even think about like the most common kind of questions are, what do I tell my friends, right?
Yeah.
So you're adding that meaning of
Yeah.
like, well, why don't you just say you're,
Yeah.
I don't know, that's for each their own to whatever. But yeah, you're
or
right.
or
You
don't tell
think
them
about
anything,
this.
like,
Yeah, right.
like, it's not, I don't know, it's not their business. I No, do you want to drink? No, thanks,
We
I'm good.
just have this. It's just, and people have talked about this, but it just seems so opposite of what it should be.
Yeah.
Uh, to where that should be the powerful choice, and it's just not. It's still seen as this, you're an outcast, and it's just so weird.
Yeah.
So
Right,
we'll just fix
because
that.
people made it mean something. It made it mean
I
that,
know.
you had a problem if you
Hmm.
decided not to.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
yeah,
very bizarre.
it's interesting.
Very bizarre.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, what do you think? What do you think is? I mean, I know you are active in like kind of a coalition of I'll call it recovery, kind of loosely,
Hmm.
group in your area. And how do you see like a neo prohibitionist movement kind of interacting in that world, or like what is your sense of their attitudes about that, and how does it all work together, or not?
Yeah, it's really interesting, because a lot of the recovery communities, um, don't they don't talk about alcohol being kind of the problem. They always pull it back to it's the person, and a lot of that is true, right? It's like we we are trying to, sometimes, not everyone, trying to numb something that we don't want to deal with. That can be true, but then there's a lot of like alcohol kind of gets off scot free,
Mm-hmm.
of like, hey, and I think AA. Let me try to find this. And AA has been around forever, has helped millions of people, including many of my friends. I just thought this was interesting that they say, the average. This is in maybe one of their FAQs where it says, "Is AA a temperance movement?" And it says something like, "While many AAs appreciate alcohol may be all right for most people, they know it's a poison for them. The average AA has no desire to deprive anyone of something that, properly handled, is a source of pleasure."
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when I hear that, and
Yeah.
that's what I hear in kind of some recovery communities, is it's not the alcohol. So I'm just
Yeah.
trying to almost just start these conversations about, hey, what if we do talk about the alcohol a little bit more? What if we
Right.
do add a little educational component to this, to what it really does, kind of challenge some of our existing beliefs that have just been handed down from whatever parents or society or social situations, to come up with your own reality of what it
Yeah.
really is. So
Right.
I'm just starting, but it's interesting because it just isn't. It's not something that gets talked about. It's always,
Have you talked
it's
about
the
that
person.
with in that community specifically? Are they?
I'm
What's the
Just a couple. I've
receptiveness?
started. Some are. It depends on where they're coming from and what they're doing. This is a tough subject because you get off. I mean, there's money over here too with
Yeah.
treatment, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is where the comparison to the healthcare comes in again. Where if I can say, yeah, you have a problem, then I can treat you. So
Right.
this is a really weird line that I've just started to talk to people about to kind of feel it out of where it might fit in that community. I think so much of what I think it can eventually get over there, the educational component into, and when I say over there, it's like into the recovery. But that's where all of the efforts have been focused, really. Like even the kind of advocacy organizations in the United States that are heavily funded by the alcohol industry focus over there because alcohol industry is kind of like, yeah, we want to help that too, right? Like
Yeah.
that's good.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But so much gets focused there, but we're not talking about. I almost think of this as almost like everyone else, like
Right.
the other 98% of the population that
Yeah.
does have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
And what would it look like if it was fully informed? Um,
Exactly. What? So as
so
you were talking about like recovery. It is weird even in the recovery community, like for AA to say that alcohol can be a source of pleasure and joy or whatever. I don't like. I don't understand. No one would ever say that about cocaine, right? Or
I
heroin. I
know.
don't. It's so bizarre to me that like this sort of esteemed group, right, who's trying to like help people improve their lives would say that this substance that has caused so much destruction, arguably not just with the stereotypical alcoholic, but like amongst even people who would say they're not alcoholics, and yet there's some kind of line between like alcohol as a drug versus like cocaine or heroin, because like
I know.
not everybody
I
that
agree.
tries cocaine and heroin get addicted. I mean, there's plenty of people
Yeah.
who tried it recreationally in their young days. They didn't get addicted and they, moved on. Like, I don't understand that. It's so weird to me.
I can't speak for them. I found that like I think that was in like an FAQ section. I was just kind of a little surprised at it. But in some of the other organizations, not I won't say this about AA, but there is a they benefit from not saying that's the problem, right?
Yeah.
Because some of their funding comes from them, right?
Yep. Yep.
Um, that'll be interesting. I've kind of avoided looking into it. It scares me a little bit to go look into it.
Yeah.
Um, but it is because it's bothersome that when organizations that have seen that kind of know the truth of the destruction that it can cause don't come out and say that it's a
Yep.
problem, right?
Right.
Um,
Yeah. That it's you, the individual, that is the problem. There's,
I happen to think, I
yeah.
mean, there's so much money in this from a
Oh my God. Yeah.
lobbying standpoint, I mean,
Billions. Yeah.
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 So I have to
Yeah.
think that in some of the CD situations, that's where it's coming from, where they are helping
Yeah.
craft the policies and the
Yeah.
language. Um,
Oh,
and so you
100%.
see it,
Yeah.
you see it, uh,
Yeah. So there's no
kind
cocaine
of,
lobby. Yeah.
right.
Yep.
Yeah. That we know of.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. You're right. And I mean, tobacco, this happened in tobacco too. You know,
Oh yeah.
it took a long time and they're still, I think
They
it just
still get.
became, that was more of a personal, this is why kind of going in this lane seems more effective is because that's what worked. It was the making it like almost socially unacceptable that took place
Yeah.
over 50
Yeah.
years that made it, that moved the needle a little bit, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't I don't know, going after big alcohol with regulations necessarily. That maybe helped, but
Right. Yeah, it was more like you were saying, like the individuals, just all of us, sort of slowly changing our minds about it.
Right.
Um, yeah, yeah, it can be so it, observationally, it can be so bizarre, but also knowing like how we are as humans, it makes total sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much pushback on this. And I
Mhm.
mean, it's when you hear someone speak about it too, you wonder if they still occasionally drink,
Yeah.
right? Like, because their mind is that, well, it's not harmful. I can have a couple of glasses, right? That's
Yeah. Yeah, like even people
it's
that
the
are
person. It's the
steeped
person
in
that
it.
has the
Yeah.
problem. Yeah, right.
Hmm.
I would have. That's like us talking about. I can't trust anyone that doesn't drink. Right. It's that mindset of like
Right.
people aren't on the other side. There's very few of us. It
Yeah.
feels like it's more and more
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
now the young people are kind of like, oh yeah, it doesn't offer shit,
Yeah. Yeah,
which is
right.
pretty
Like
encouraging. Really encouraging.
it is. It's fantastic. And I think it's like this whole movement, this whole new industry of non-alcoholic,
Yeah,
beer
it's
and
awesome.
wine and cocktails, and I love that. I think
Yeah,
that's fantastic that, there's a little economic enterprise there to be made within this alternative of like and it's almost like an accepting of, yeah, this is kind of the culture we grew up in, but we can sort of reframe it, like, yeah, I do want to sit around with my friends and have a drink, but I don't want to feel like crap, and I don't want the destructive effects of this. So, I want to be able to like engage in that, just like
yeah,
you were talking about your experience of just going to the bar for the sake of being around people and being social. Like we still want that, but give us some alternatives
yeah.
to that.
That's an interesting piece, you know, because what I found, and I will credit like some of the big alcohol companies are supporting these non-alcoholic, like they're buying up some of these non-alcoholic and
Mm-hmm.
getting it spread to a wider audience. But that social connection is a key pillar, like of health, right? Like so. But what I found is when I quit drinking, the connections that I had were so superficial,
Mm-hmm.
right? So like what you're
Yep.
talking about with, and I think this is what maybe these younger generations are finding out is like they're having much deeper conversations than I ever did. And I'm just
Right.
starting, in the past 5 years to have these with friends. And it's so
Right.
much cooler
Yeah.
uh, to get to know, a few people on a much deeper level than 100 people on a
Yeah.
superficial level.
Yeah. Yes.
Um, it's
100%.
so important. I'd love, and you're starting to see some pop up where it's just more connection spaces, and that can happen in bars, right? You can have a non-alcoholic drink next to someone like that can happen.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. To your point, that like, I can't tell you how many times, even as we were sitting there drinking, like I was drinking with the other person and they're like pouring their heart out to me or whatever. And then also thinking, they're not going to remember shit about this the next day. Like, we're just going to go
Yeah,
right back to like this kind of superficial relationship. And like, you know, and even though, you're conscious of that, you're still seeking out connection on some level. So
hmm
dive right back into it, even though you're like, this is still unsatisfying. This still isn't,
yeah,
the connection
yeah.
that I'm wanting.
It's doing almost the opposite of what it promised, right? It's like,
Totally.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. It
Yeah,
totally is. Yeah.
I
So
like this
what's
better.
next? 100%. Amen to that. Yeah. Amen to that. Yeah. So what's next? What's
What's
next for you?
next? Yeah, good question, Corey. I mean, really, I think the way that we're going is this will be some sort of a nonprofit organization. So it'll be setting up that organization and really defining what it is that we're trying to do. We know it's something around education. We just don't know how that looks, whether it's like we've talked about, is it putting commercials on counter marketing type stuff? Is it, creating some programs for schools or whatnot? I think finding that like one thing to really sink our teeth into to get the support from people. And really it's that message of like, let's give people this fully informed choice. And that choice is empowering. And kind of, I don't know. I like the thought of it being a movement, but I think that's already started. It's just kind of being a part of the movement that's already kind of taking place out there in the world of, hey, look, things can be better if you start to figure some of this out.
Yeah. Well, because even though there's a movement afoot, I always think of it like your contribution to it is your unique voice about it, and the way that you are going to talk about it is different than the 25-year-old who is who's talking about it. And so you're able to communicate what may be essentially the same idea. You're able to communicate it in a much different way than anybody else in it. So I think it's fundamentally so helpful to have multiple voices in that movement, because it just affects so many other people by having that.
I think about that as well. Yeah. Like whenever it's talked about at schools, it's like, that's not me doing that talking. I'm talking to the midlife people possibly.
But then you'll talk to the midlife people who do have, the passion for like school education or something. And, once they get it, the light bulb comes on for them, then they can like, give the light to somebody else. Yeah.
But I think it like, this is a bunch of partnerships, it seems like too, right? Like, hey, let's all come together on this. Like, this isn't one person's initiative or whatnot. This is a bunch of different groups that are already doing amazing work. And kind of the more we can share resources and whatnot, the better.
Yeah. Just putting your stuff out into the world and, let it be a part of a broader conversation.
Yeah.
No, I think it's a noble cause. I can't wait.
Thank you. It's a fun. That's kind of fun too. It seems to be a tilt towards humor. Right? Like in all of this is like, which I think adds to it. It's not like lecturing, right? It's more how can we make this fun, right? That seems to play better, and it's where I enjoy it too so much more.
That's definitely one of your strengths, providing levity.
Yeah, exactly.
To a situation.
Exactly. So we'll see.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited for it, and so excited that you did this with me today. This is fantastic. So appreciate it. And let me know how I can help in the Neo Prohibitionist movement. Happy to do it.
I will. Thank you, Kori. I loved being on. Let's do it again.
Much. Right on. I'm down. Let's do it.